Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. It is presented by Gatorade on this Monday. Great to have you with us. Dave Revson, Rafael Davis. If this is what the home stretch is going to be like in the Big Ten, sign me up. I am in.
And I am exhausted. What a weekend of games. Purdue has made beating top 10 opponents this season look way easier than it should have been. I think that loss in Nebraska helped these boys. They've been balling ever since. But I can't believe the week Nebraska's had. Them boys, they have to be tired. Overtime game after overtime game, and now they got a big week this week. They got to get a road win.
Yes, and they'll be facing a team on Wednesday that's had consecutive overtime games as well. Pretty fascinating to think about that matchup. But again, it was a really competitive weekend. The marquee game, our big story, the two top 6 teams going at it in Madison. Purdue now a game up in the loss column after winning by 6. This one reasonably tight throughout, though the Badgers never led in the second half. It was Purdue's 5th win over a top 10 team this season. It's tied for the most of any Division I team in a regular season in the last 15 years. Let's break this one down. They did a pretty good job, Wisconsin did, I thought, in limiting Zach Edey.
Yep.
They held Purdue to 3 made three-pointers.
Yep.
So how did the Boilermakers ultimately pull this one out?
This is the Lance Jones games. This is a game where Lance Jones showed his true value on the floor and why Coach Painter brought him in. Coach Painter has been missing 2 things the last couple of seasons, a lockdown defender and a guy that can go get his own bucket off the bounce without having to run a set for him. Lance Jones was big time on the offensive end. 20 points, got a few steals, got him in transition. When that shot clock is running down, they have a guy that can put the ball in his hands, that can make a move off the bounce, has a little wiggle, can go finish at the rim. And then defensively, he took A.J. Storr out of this game.
Yeah.
I know what Purdue wants to do defensively. They want to switch run through 4, when it's handoffs, when it's ball screens. They didn't do that with A.J. Storr. They said, Lance Jones, you got him. And I can remember Coach Painter doing that with me with certain guys, and he shut him down. A.J. Storr got his 14 points, but he was 4 of 15 from the field. I think that was a big difference in the game.
It just felt like Purdue's defense was so good that Wisconsin ultimately settled for bad shots.
Yeah.
And that's just, to me, so uncharacteristic of what Wisconsin is. There's 2 things that I thought Purdue did in this game that caused Wisconsin to be who they typically aren't. One is exactly what we were talking about there. And then the other is just how good they were on the offensive glass. Like, Wisconsin just doesn't give up offensive rebounds. And they gave up a ton in this game. And I just think that speaks to how physical Purdue was on the defensive end, the poor shot selection from Wisconsin, and how physical they were on the glass.
And that's why it's imperative for Purdue not to turn the basketball over on the road. You see when they go to Northwestern and lose, 17, 18 turnovers. They go to Rutgers, they get in a close game, they have upwards 15, 16 turnovers. When they take care of the basketball, it's a possession game because sometimes Purdue's best offense is a missed shot. They get the basketball off the rim. You got Zach Edey, you got Mason Gillis, Caleb First, Trey Kaufman-Renn, and those boys. They're coming to eat on the glass because they see that as an opportunity to score the ball. But the decision I love that Coach Painter did, and I think it confused even Tyler Wall, was putting Zach Edey on Tyler Wall. It messed up everything that Wisconsin wants to do. It took away their advantages on the offensive end. You think about how Wisconsin was able to beat Michigan State. You had Steven Kraut coming to set a ball screen. He pick and pop. Matty Sissoko couldn't get there. He knocked down 4 threes. When you put Trey Kaufman-Renn or Mason Gillis on Steven Kraut, you take away that pick and pop ability. You just switch everything out. And then since Tyler Wall isn't a threat from the three-point line, you put Zach Edey at the rim kind of as a center fielder. Now he's playing help on everybody. So A.J. Storr, he may beat Lance Jones to the basket, but he's running into Zach Edey at the rim, so he's thinking about it on the drives. And then also Steven Kraut, he's going to take Mason Gillis and Trey Kaufman-Renn into the post. But now you have big Zach Edey as a help side defender. All thought that was a great decision. You saw in that second half, Coach Gard started to go to Tyler Wall more in space, started to let him drive the ball, and it forced Zach Edey to guard him. But I thought that was a great decision. It messed up everything.
Let's talk about where the Badgers are. 2 straight losses here, something that hadn't happened since November. They gave up the big lead at Nebraska, and again, that's never great.
Right.
But then you're coming home and you got a really tough game against the number 2 team in the country. I don't think there's any shame in either one of these losses. Right. That being said, it did just feel to me like they were a little off kilter. And again, part of that is all the things that you outlined that Purdue did really well. But from Wisconsin's point of view, certainly there were opportunities there. Just couldn't knock down threes, and it just felt like they were kind of a step off, I felt like, on the offensive end the whole game.
Yeah, I just think what Purdue was able to do, it threw their system off. Wisconsin is a flow team. They like to run their stuff. They like to get the shot clock down. They like to run their motion back cut. And when you have a guy that's not being guarded, it's just tough to run your stuff. I played in this league, Defensive Player of the Year. That made me not be guarded on the offensive end. Guys would leave me. They go double-team Caleb Swanigan. They double-team A.J. Hammonds. They send extra defenders to Vince Edwards on his drives. It doesn't help offensively if you can't shoot the ball from deep and the big man's not guarding you. I can remember playing against Michigan State and Coach Painter putting A.J. on tum-tum there. It's a crazy matchup, but it messed up everything that they wanted to do, and you couldn't play tum-tum. When we would play Wisconsin, he put A.J. on Nigel Hayes and let Vince Edwards guard Frank Kaminsky. It's all about schemes and matching up, but I think if you had 10, 12 more minutes in this game, once Tyler Wall figured out what he could do with Zach Edey down low, it's a different story. I'm not worried about Wisconsin at all. The loss at Nebraska, I think they just thought Nebraska was going to quit. I think they thought they killed their spirit, allowed Nebraska to stay in it, but I'm not worried about these boys. I think A.J. Stewart's going to be great.
I mentioned their first 2-game losing streak since November. After that, remember, they went on a great run, including some of their better wins of the year, the Marquette win, Michigan State, so some really good ones in there. And I'm with you. I'm not all that concerned. They go to Michigan and Rutgers here the next 2 games. We'll see whether or not they can get back on track. I was in Champaign last night, Illinois overtime win against Nebraska. I thought the Huskers played really well. The 11-1 run at the end to send it into overtime, and then Illinois ends up prevailing in the OT. We saw some fabulous individual performances in this game. Casey Tamanaga made up for some lost time. I thought Rink Mass played really well. And then on the other end, I mean, Ty Rogers on the glass was just absolutely phenomenal. Illinois is such a good rebounding team, and when you're sitting right there at courtside, you really get an appreciation for it, Rafael.
Yeah, and we start with Ty Rogers because you talk to Illinois fans, you talk to people around the Big Ten, the thing they say about Illinois is that they don't have a point guard. But I think Ty Rogers is the greatest point guard that they could have with guys like Marcus Domask, with guys like Terrence Shannon in the backcourt that need the ball in their hands. You think Ty Rogers defensively, he's going to guard 1 through 5. He can take anybody out of a game. He rebounds his tail off. He's going to go to the glass hard. Offensively, he can bring the basketball up, handle the ball against pressure, initiate offense, and then he turns into your four-man in the half court. He's a great cutter, a great ball screen guy, and when you put your center on Ty Rogers, which a lot of teams have done, centers aren't used to going to find guys to block out. When you think about Rink Mass, when that ball goes up, he's used to having a guy right next to him to just hit it and go up. Now you got to turn ahead and go look for Ty Rogers. Just like Tyler Wall was able to get that big offensive rebound, Zach Edey wasn't used to going to find him. So that's Ty Rogers' advantage on the glass. He's figured that out. He accepts who he is offensively. But then you think about Marcus Domask. I think he's got to be a point guard in the half court. I think Terrence Shannon has got to be the guy, make open threes, get him out in transition, straight line drives to the left hand. But when the shot clock goes down, when all else fails, get the basketball to Marcus Domask, give him a ball screen in space, and let him make plays. Nebraska was able to come back in those last 4 minutes because it just got stagnant for Illinois. The ball started to stick, everybody started to watch, and Nebraska just started to zone off on Terrence Shannon, and the ball just wasn't flowing.
Yeah, agree with you 100%. I mean, it just felt like, I don't know whether Illinois kind of along the lines of what you were saying with the Wisconsin-Nebraska game, where Illinois just felt like, okay, you know, we've got him here.
Exactly.
And again, give credit to Nebraska's second straight game where it would have been easy to kind of fold the tent, and they didn't do that. Yeah, Illinois, I mean, kind of through the bulk of the game, the offensive rebounding is just, they're just so good and so relentless on the glass. And to me, the difference is not the big guys. It's all the other guys you're talking about. I mean, Guerrier is a wing, you know, he's 6'8", but he is a relentless rebounder. Rogers is tremendous. Domask can get on the glass. I mean, that's what really strikes me about Illinois. It's not about rebounding from the bigs because they don't have a traditional low post big. You know, Hawkins is a different kind of player.
Because you think about it, you put Rink Mask on Ty Rogers, who are you putting on Coleman Hawkins and Quincy Guerrier? You're expecting your Casey Tominaga, C.J. Wilcher to block out Quincy Guerrier. It's just not going to happen. You think about Purdue, they put Fletcher Loyer on Quincy Guerrier. He's not blocking him out. Quincy Guerrier is a grown man. You've got to put a big man to block him out. So they have cross matches where they can go to the glass, but also Terrence Shannon, 6'7", 235 pounds. That's your two guard. You look at Marcus Domask, he's 6'6". He can go get you a board. Even off the bench, Luke Goody, Fort Wayne kid, a tough guy. He's going to go to the glass. They got guys that want to eat on the offensive glass because some of those guys, when you have a guy as dominant as a Terrence Shannon or as dominant as a Marcus Domask, that's the way you score the ball. When that ball comes off the rim, you grab it, you go back up. Because Quincy Guerrier didn't come into this season as a great offensive rebounder. He just figured out that's how he's going to excel in his role. I think coming down to the end of the season for Illinois to reach their pinnacle, it's about role definition. Because they get in crunch time, it's not equal opportunity offense. Everybody can't shoot the same amount of shots as everybody on the floor. It's got to be guys taking the right shots down the stretch. The ball's got to move. The ball's got to find his hands to Marcus Domask or Terrence Shannon.
What about from Nebraska's point of view? Again, a really good effort here. They had every opportunity to win. They still haven't won a conference road game, but certainly played well enough to win in this one. And to me, I mean, having Keisei Tominaga back and shooting the ball like he did, I mean, that changes everything. He had a career high in this game, 31 points. He had scored 14 points in the last 3 games combined. He had exceeded that by halftime. Right? I mean, he just, it just felt like it clicked. And it was interesting, in talking to Fred Hoiberg yesterday, he was just saying to me, you know, Casey's played so much basketball because he had the international ball over the summer. The previous summer, he had played on the 3-on-3 team for Japan as well. So it's just like it never stops for him. And he said just at a certain point, I feel like, you know, kind of maybe it drains you a little bit mentally. But if he was suffering from that, he certainly didn't show it last night because he was just great.
And you think about who he did it against. He did it against Ty Rodgers and Terrence Shannon Jr., 2 of the toughest defenders, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. He had 31 points on 14 field goals. He was absolutely amazing. He was able to get to the lane, make plays off the bounce. He got to the free throw line. He had a few assists in there. If Keisei Tominaga is going to play this way, watch out for Nebraska going forward. But I can understand. After watching last night, I get exactly what Coach Painter used to say to us in the locker room. When you're on the road in the Big Ten, you got to win by 10 points because a lot of things didn't go Nebraska's way down the stretch, but you can't blame it on that. You've got to be better in the smaller areas. I thought Rink Mass had one of his better performances on the road, just taking it right to Coleman Hawkins, didn't settle for anything. I thought he was fabulous, but the guy I thought played a real big factor for Nebraska. It's just great to have Juwan Gary back. It's great to have your tough guy back. When things get rowdy, when things get tough, you got Juwan Gary, a big physical, tough guy. He got 12 points, 11 rebounds. He's going to fight until the buzzer sounds. I mean, you got a guy like that, you're never out of the game. But I'm not too worried about this game for Nebraska. You lose a tough one in a tough environment, in a tough road venue. But you got your guy Keisei going back. Rink Mass is figuring it out on the road. If those 2 guys, I'm not asking for 30 every night for Keisei, but if those 2 guys are consistently scoring, Juwan Gary going, it's going to be good for Nebraska because you look at Bryce Williams. He only scored 7 points. He's a guy that can fill it up.
Yeah, and Wilcher had 2.
Exactly.
Wilcher was coming off an incredible game against Wisconsin. So can you figure out a way to put it all together? But it's clear that's a good team, a really good Nebraska team.
Turnovers,
no doubt. And a big week coming up for them, as you said. We'll get to that in a bit. Looking back on Saturday in the Big Ten, Penn State winning in Bloomington. First time they'd done that in 10 years. Minnesota rallied from 9 down in the final 6 minutes, beat Northwestern in overtime. Rutgers came back from a 15-point deficit to top Michigan in Ann Arbor. And Michigan State held Maryland to 31% from the field in a 9-point win. Let's start with that one. Points hard to come by, I'd say, for both teams. To me, from where I was sitting, Malik Hall was the difference in this game.
Oh, yeah, Malik Hall was big time on both ends of the floor. I think this was the first game where Michigan State got punched in the mouth, and they decided to punch right back even harder. And it started with Malik Hall on both ends. He was big offensively. His 19.7 rebounds were huge, but it's how he went about it. It was down low, in the post, on the block, getting to his spot, scoring the ball, and then defensively, he was matched up with Dante Scott. Malik Hall's a 5th year, Dante Scott's a 5th year. They've guarded each other for 5 years now. You know that's a rivalry. In between the lines, Dante Scott gets 13 points, but he goes 5 of 19 from the field. That is beautiful defense from Malik Hall. This is who Coach Izzo expects Malik Hall to be, especially as a senior. He's got to be the guy to lead the charge. Tyson Walker did what he was supposed to do. He just does his job every game. But I thought A.J. Hogarth was also big time. Only scored 6 points, but that's huge. He got the basketball where it was supposed to go, whether it was to Tyson Walker and his spots. Jaden Akins made some shots, and he got the ball to Malik Hall. But it's 5 rebounds, 8 assists. That's who A.J. Hogarth's got to be. And then you mentioned the defense. It's defend, rebound, run. And they were able to do that against Maryland.
To me, the issue for Maryland in this game was that Reese was, basically a non-factor.
Yep.
I mean, the foul trouble, and then you come into the second half with 3 fouls and literally get the fourth 8 seconds.
Just not locked in.
So, no, I mean, just a rough day, I thought, for Julian Reese. And it felt a little bit like what we saw from him last year, where foul trouble was really a big issue. And without him on the court, I mean, it really was just Jabir Young. He had more than half of their points.
Jabir Young did his job again. He put the team in his backpack, said, get on my back. I'm going to try to win this one for us. He got him 31 points. He was getting to his spots. He had a good game. Dante Scott tried to help, but they only had 3 guys that made a field goal for Maryland. That's not going to win you road games in the Big Ten. And I know Julian Reese was in foul trouble. He only played 14 minutes. But in those 14 minutes, you got to figure out a way to shoot more than 2 times. 0 for 2 from the field, just 2 points, only 1 rebound. I don't care if Julian Reese plays 5 minutes in the game. He's got to get me more than 1 rebound. They're not going to win games if Julian Reese isn't a factor on the glass, a factor defensively, a factor on offense, and just staying on the floor.
I just thought, ultimately, in a game like this where it's really hard to score, one team kind of needs to dig down. And to your point, you mentioned it kind of at the top of the conversation, Michigan State was that team, right? They just they had the resolve, and they figured it out. What about Northwestern and Minnesota? Wildcats went on the road. They did not play well at all. I mean, the turnovers were crazy, just so uncharacteristic of who they are. They missed a ton at the rim. They were 4 of 20 on layups and dunks, and yet the game's in overtime. And give Minnesota credit, figure out a way to pull it out and get a win they really needed. I mean, you look at Minnesota now, like it's not crazy to look at them and think they can make a run here. It's a good team.
Not at all. And I was talking to Coach Beeline last night. He was saying this game wasn't won at the end. This game was won at the end of the first half.
Yes. Yeah, Northwestern kind of gave it away a little bit there.
They did not. You got to finish halves. Good teams finish halves. The 4-minute segments to the half, you got to finish them out. And Northwestern did not finish that first half great. Elijah Hawkins was big time. In the final 4 minutes of that first half, he went on a 10-0 run. And he didn't score all 10 points, but he scored or assisted on a 10-0 run every single basket to finish out the half, knocked down that deep 3 at the buzzer. That gave Minnesota life. That gave them energy. That gave them confidence to go into that second half. And then in that overtime, after Elijah Hawkins fouls out, Dawson Garcia takes over the game. When Dawson decides to play down low, when he decides to be 6'11", 250, there's not another 4-man in the Big Ten that can do anything with him. When he's driving that basketball to the lane, Brooks Barnheiser can't keep him out of there. Brooks Barnheiser can't keep Dawson Garcia off the glass if he decides to put his nose on the rim. He's got to continue to play that way and not float around the perimeter and shoot a lot of jump shots and play pretty basketball. And then on the flip side, when you're on the road, especially in the Big Ten, your guys have got to be your guys. Zach Edey has got to dominate on the road, and I put Boo Buie in that same conversation. Boo on the road can't have a half of basketball. He has 4 points and he's 2 for 5 from the field. And I get we've told him that he's turned into a great point guard. He's letting the game come to him at times. But there's times where Boo has to force it. There's times where Northwestern is struggling to score. Boo's got to get him into something. He's got to take a bad one maybe to get into some rhythm, especially in overtime. You think of 5 minutes. Boo Buie didn't take a shot in overtime until it was less than 1 minute to go in the game. He's got to be the guy with the ball in his hands, 1-4 low, clear this out. I'm going to go get us one. And I know it's a balance. It can't be all bad shots, but he's got to be a guy. If they're going to lose on the road, Boo Buie's got to have 18, 19 shots. He's got to be struggling or something, but he can't just defer to others. He had 20 in this one, but he got to have 30, 35 and tough ones on the road.
I think part of the challenge, too, is they just don't have anywhere to turn with the bench right now, right? It's really just Martinelli. They're not getting much of anything out of the bigs at all. And it feels like, for whatever reason, Jordan Clayton isn't as much a part of that rotation as he was earlier in the year. So you're talking about, Minnesota had a week off. Northwestern had played an overtime game against Purdue on the road, and now you're going on the road again to Minneapolis. Like, it's just a tough scheduling break, and everyone gets them in the Big Ten. But this is a team that you could see them just lose their legs in overtime, really lose their legs in the last 5 minutes of regulation. I mean, they didn't hit a field goal last 5 minutes of regulation. It just felt like, frankly, they were tired.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I always say, role players, freshmen, young guys, they play better at home. And when you're on the road, you need your dogs to be dogs. And it just so happens Northwestern doesn't have that many top guys to score the ball. That's why Boo Buie is so important on the road, because those guys, their legs did die. The bench guys didn't give them much production. Martinelli wasn't the same player, so they're looking to Boo Buie to carry us. You look at Purdue, when they're struggling, they put that basketball up here, and they look for Zach Edey. That's what Northwestern does with Boo Buie. So he's got to force it some. When those guys are giving them nothing, he's got to pick up the slack. And I'm not saying he's doing a bad job with it. It's just I want him to take a few bad shots and kind of get him into some more rhythm and try to force it a little bit more and not defer to guys, because, like you said, those guys were tired. And if we could see it, I know Boo could see it.
That being said, a lot of capable scorers on that team. I'm not sure Chris Collins would agree with you.
Off the bounce, I don't see it off the bounce. One-on-one, not really.
Let's not rule out the Gophers. They got 6 quad one games left. There's still some opportunities there on their schedule. What about Penn State? Second straight road win. Did it without Kanye Clary. Man, Ace Baldwin has been amazing these last 2 games.
No, Ace Baldwin, 20 points, 8 assists on the road. He set the offense. He was big time. Controlled the pace of the game for the entire game. You think about how you went on the road. You fight on the glass. You take care of the basketball. Penn State only had 6 turnovers in this game. That was big time. They had 17 points off of IU's turnovers. I think that was a big difference in the game. But they just took Indiana's spirit. They took their fight away from them. They punched them right in the mouth. Indiana never responded to them. It started with Ace Baldwin. You got Hicks made some shots in there. Jamil Brown started making some shots. It was just a good day for Penn State on the road.
I mean, the outside shooting was tremendous. And this is not a team you think of as a great outside shooting team. But I think it just kind of speaks to a bigger issue. And you're talking about Ace Baldwin, and this will bleed into some Indiana talk as well. And I don't necessarily want to leave Penn State because, to me, the story here was Penn State. But the guard play was so much better for Penn State than it was for IU. And it just feels like this has been a theme throughout the year when you talk about the Hoosiers, is it just isn't there in the backcourt.
Yeah, Gabe Cupps played 30-plus minutes, only gave him 2 points, 1 or 2 from the field. Ace Baldwin gave him 20. So if you're not going to defend at a high level, you're not going to affect the offensive game at a high level, you shouldn't be out there, but there's no one else to put in for him. And I love Gabe Cupps. He can score the basketball. He plays as hard as he can.
He's going to be a good player.
He's a freshman.
He's a young guy.
Just freshman going up against a senior, and that's just what happens. And when you don't have a guy like Trey Galloway going off for 20, 25, that puts the highlight on you. But I think Indiana's guard play, it's got to improve. The guys off the bench has got to come in and give them something. C.J. Gunn has got to be aggressive. You think about Anthony Leal, he's got to be a guy that can come in and give them something. Walker and those guys. But like you said about Northwestern, it's tough to win when your guards aren't giving you much, but your bench isn't producing at all. Indiana's guards aren't giving them anything, and their bench hasn't produced in a while. Because you look at Khalil Ware, 25 and 11. Malik Renew gets him 16. The bigs are doing their job, but it so happened that Kudus Wahab had a great game. He had 14 points, so he can kind of offset that a little bit, and then it turns into a guards game.
No, Indiana's front court is every bit as good as you need it to be a solid postseason team. But I think the other thing is it just felt like, and these things are kind of intangible, right? But it just felt like the energy, there was much more energy on Penn State's side, and it felt like it just kind of dwindled away from Indiana as that second half went on, right? It was Penn State seizing the game, yes, but it was also Indiana, I don't want to say conceding because that implies that you're giving up, but it was Indiana letting it slip away, not fighting back, not matching the energy that Penn State was bringing to the court.
I think the players on the floor gave up. I mean, I don't think the coaching staff gave up. I think they were fighting. You look at Coach Woodson after the game, he says, I should have played my walk-ons. At least they care. So that means in that huddle, guys are quiet, guys aren't talking, guys aren't huddling on the floor, getting each other going. When Penn State makes a run, someone on that team, Trey Galloway, he's got to pull the guys together, get them in the huddle. When coaches call timeouts, coaches spend time with each other first. They talk about what they're going to do offensively, defensively, the strategy. The players have a second to each other. That's for the players to talk. That's for Trey Galloway to say, we got to get going. We're at home. We got to defend better. Someone's got to call a guy out. And they didn't have that yesterday because Penn State came into their arena, shot 57% from the field, made 12 threes, only turned the ball over 6 times. They got to do whatever they wanted on the offensive end. Indiana added no pressure defensively to Penn State, and that starts with the players. A coach can't make you play hard. It's about pride. It's about the want to. It's about the leadership. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be a good team, especially when the Big Ten is loaded like it is this year.
Interesting. Huge game for them. Indiana goes on the road to Ohio State, and that's as close to a must-win
for sure,
as you can have for the Hoosiers here. But a really nice win for Penn State. Rutgers ended a 3-game skid on Saturday going into Ann Arbor and coming away with a 10-point win. It's a game the Wolverines led for 34 minutes, but the Scarlet Knights finished on an 18-2 run as they handed Michigan its 5th straight loss, 10th in the last 11 games. First road victory for Rutgers in nearly 2 months. This was a good win for the Scarlet Knights. Jeremiah Williams made his debut, and you can certainly see that he's going to make an impact for Rutgers. I thought Cliff Amore on the offensive end, he's really starting to play better, giving them a bit more there. This is encouraging, particularly, again, given that they had dug a fairly significant hole.
Yeah, in Jeremiah Williams' first game back, I could tell he's going to be a good player, and these guys have been getting killed by him in practice because the way they were giving him the basketball. They were giving him the ball, letting him drive it, letting him create, and you don't do that to a guy that's just getting back into the lineup unless you respect it, unless you know he can do it. I thought Derek Simpson was big time. He kind of got back into form. I thought Jeremiah Williams helped Derek Simpson in the space of spacing the floor, giving him a running mate. And then Cliff Amore, he was big time. He had 16 points. But I go to Michigan. You go to halftime up by 9. There's got to be a guy in the locker room that's talking. Coach Howard and those guys, they're in another room. They're talking about strategy going into the second half. There's got to be a player in the locker room that says, we're up 9, but we know Rutgers. They're going to make a run. We got to take their run, and we got to punch back. They came out in that second half like the game was already run, and they got run out of the gym.
12 points in the last 17 minutes,
Crazy.
19 turnovers. I mean, there were just a few moments where they just looked so disjointed.
Yeah.
Like just not connected at all. And I don't know what you do about that when you're in February, right? I mean, teams have bad days, and I get that. But, man, that second half was about as bad as it gets.
Yeah, there's no real rhythm to it. You look at Doug McDaniel only playing home games, not on the road with them. There's no rhythm to the flow of the offense because when he's back in there, he has the ball in his hands. He's going to make the plays. When he's not in the game, you think Namari Burnett, Jalen Llewellyn, they have the basketball. Olivier Conway is the bigger piece of the offense. There's not a consistency in the offense, so it's throwing off the flow of everyone else, especially the role guys off the bench. When Doug is in there, they get in limited action. You think of Jackson and those guys off the bench, they're not getting the opportunity to score the ball. I think until Doug is able to go home and away, we're going to see stuff like this, especially in crunch time, because maybe he doesn't have the conditioning there to go 40 minutes and make plays at the end of the game. But it was just a meltdown. I give a lot of credit to Rutgers because they fought through. We know one thing about college basketball, especially about the Big Ten. Your defense is going to travel. And they dug in defensively, and now they started to make some shots. They started to score the ball, and maybe they could start to win some games and build some confidence into the tournament.
Yeah, and even just build confidence into next year. Like, I just think if Rutgers, their schedule's really tough. And so it might be a big ask to say, can you win enough games to get into the NIT? It would be great if they were able to do that.
Right.
But I just think if there's a positive vibe surrounding the program heading into the offseason, if you feel like, hey, we played pretty well down the stretch and we set the foundation, because again, you have 2 of the top 3 freshmen, incoming freshmen in the country coming in next year. They're going to be good. So, but what's the feeling around the program? To me, that's really important. We know what the feeling around Michigan is right now. The feeling is we need a win. They've won 1 game since December the 16th. Ohio State is reeling as well. Losers of 7 of 8. Iowa gets the home win. That was a game they kind of had to have, the Hawkeyes, and again, figured out a way down the stretch here in what was a very tight game throughout. This game was tied for more than 8 minutes.
Yes. If I'm Ohio State and I'm looking at the box score, I go on the road, I take care of the basketball, I fight on the glass, I make some threes. Iowa struggles from 3, and I still lose the game by 2. It's because Iowa made winning plays. Iowa made 2 more free throws than Ohio State. That was the difference in the game. I thought the decision Coach McCaffrey made a couple weeks ago was amazing. He put Josh Dixon to the starting lineup, and Tony Perkins has been balling ever since because it gives him space. Tony Perkins had 20 points the last 5 games in a row because he has 2 shooters on both wings. You're not leaving Payne Sanford. You're not leaving Josh Dix, and you can't guard Tony Perkins one-on-one, keeping him out of the lane. So he was able to get to the basket. He's able to get to the free throw line at a high rate. He's been balling. I think Sanford has really taken that leadership role because when you're in tight games, I can remember a couple weeks ago, you look at Owen Freeman, a freshman. He made a mistake against Maryland, and Payne Sanford got right in his grill, said, that's not how you do this. And then they ended up losing that game. Payne Sanford got scored on. He went to the press conference and said, this was my fault. I messed up. I let Jameer Young get to his left. And since then, they've been a good basketball team. But when you get in close games, when you're not shooting it well, you're 3 of 10 from the three-point line, your leaders have got to be the ones to step up. Tony Perkins, Payne Sanford, they've been big time for Iowa down this later stretch.
I also thought it was great to see Patrick McCaffrey hit those free throws down the stretch. It hasn't been the year that he wanted it to be. He's had some injury problems here. That's hard to do. I mean, you know much better than I do, but man, like the game's on the line, you've got to make those. And he's a really good shooter and a really good foul shooter. But when you haven't been playing well and when you've been a little bit banged up, to me, that shows incredible mental toughness.
Oh, it's big-time mental toughness. You look at all the things that Patrick McCaffrey has been throughout his life. I don't know if there's a more tougher guy in the Big Ten. He's went through some injuries. He's had some struggles. But when you step up in winning time and make big free throws, that shows how tough you are. It's not about pushing the guy down or going face-to-face with the guy. It's in winning times, making big plays, making winning plays, getting a rebound, stepping up to the line, and knocking one down. I thought that was big time for him, big time for his teammates to see him knock him down. But if Patrick McCaffrey, he can build from this. You make some free throws. The next game, you make some threes. Iowa, we've seen them make a run in the Big Ten tournament before. They could do the same thing with this lineup.
Yeah, no doubt. They still have 5 quad 1 games in the regular season. So they absolutely could. They just haven't won any quad 1 games yet. So they're going to have to win a few of those. Quick thoughts on Ohio State. It's now 15 straight road losses for the Buckeyes. Had every opportunity in this one, just couldn't figure it out.
They've got to defend. They've got to commit to defending. They got to want to defend. It can't just be me, offensive end. I'm looking good on the offensive end. They've got to get production from the inside, but their biggest thing is not scoring the ball. It's not moving it at this point. It's guarding somebody. If they're not going to guard, they're not going to be in games.
Indiana and Maryland at home this week. They've got to stop the bleeding. I mean, you have to figure out a way to win those games. It is time for our big stat presented by Gatorade. The magic number down to 66 now for Caitlin Clark to pass Kelsey Plum and become the all-time leading scorer in women's college hoops. Clark had 38 in Iowa's win over Maryland Saturday. It was the Hawks' 18th win in their last 19 games. She will continue her pursuit of the record as Iowa battles Penn State Thursday right here on the Big Ten Network. You can see that game at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Clark and the Hawkeyes up to number 2 in the AP poll this week as the Hawks supplant Kansas State, which fell after a loss. They are down to number 8. Ohio State up 3 spots now. They are number 5. So the Big Ten, 2 of the top 5 teams in the country, 3 of the top 14. That's where Indiana finds themselves. And then look at the future Big Ten members, UCLA and USC, both in the top 10 as well. It was not a great weekend for Iowa wrestling. The Hawks upset in shocking fashion Friday in Ann Arbor. How about Michigan opening the duel with 5 straight wins? They roll from there. They win it 24-11. Iowa's first loss in a dual meet to any team other than Penn State in 5 years. Big Ten hockey this past weekend. Minnesota went into Madison, topped the Badgers in OT Friday, then skated to a 1-1 tie Saturday. The Badgers took the shootout. First place Michigan State split its series in South Bend, and Michigan went into Columbus, swept Ohio State, outscored the Buckeyes 8-3 in the 2 victories. Paul Caponegri is here, and Cappy, let's start with Minnesota and Wisconsin. Badgers have been a great story this year, no doubt. But Minnesota appeared to be the better team, at least this past weekend. What did you see in those 2 games?
Yeah, I mean, obviously by the scores, very tight, low scoring. I think that's the Wisconsin way. I think Mike Hastings, that's what he's brought to the Badger program. But Minnesota, you saw they can play any way. They can score you. They can play that low-scoring game. Justin Close and that was really good too. I just thought they were, if you're picking a little, they were just a little better, had more scoring chances. And then, there was some controversy with referees.
There were two goals that were overturned.
In one, there was no explanation. And those are the ones you get a little frustrated as fans, I'm sure. And we saw Twitter, X, Gopher fans were not very happy.
Neither was Bob Motzko, it seemed.
No, and coaches are never happy.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. Rarely does a coach have a call go against him. I just want to commend you.
Yes. Hey, that was great. Really tough, though, because when you're in those, you're talking inches. And then the goalie interference thing. In my game Saturday, I had a whole different thing with hits to the head and all that. It's tough. The referees have a tough job.
Yes.
And we're sitting here talking about it. We'd rather be talking about the game. But those were big, impactful plays. And when you're talking about NCAA tournament and the percentage points in those computers, those impact that. If Minnesota wins that game Saturday, you're talking them moving up into the top 10. And right now they're still outside that.
Right. Okay, so again, Wisconsin's been a great story. Michigan State's been a great story all year. Minnesota is a powerhouse, as everyone who watches Big Ten hockey knows.
Yep.
There was some turnover on this team, clearly a lot of turnover on this roster from last year. Do they still have time? Do they have time here? They're really playing well here. I think they've lost, one of their last 9 games.
Yep.
Do they have time to be a factor and maybe win this thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because their young guys are starting to grow. Oliver Moore had a goal and assist. He's one of those guys from the U.S. team. They came back, and he's really made that jump. And like I said, they're playing. He can feel now. Like Minnesota's bored in the first half. They're like, well, what are we really playing for?
Yeah.
Now you can see the end where they're trying to just get to their peak, and you don't want to, you don't want to hit it now. You want to hit it in March, but they're making strides there, and you're seeing it going into a hostile Cole Center, which was packed both nights against them, and they didn't bother them.
How cool is that, by the way?
And they had a nice weekend there, back to back, and then Sunday
and
with
then
the Purdue
the basketball game with Purdue. No, a lot going on.
Busy weekend in Madison.
The Badgers just one win in their last 5 games. That's a little deceptive. You got ties in there, whatever.
Sure.
But again, are we starting to see a few cracks in the foundation here, or is this just kind of the normal ebb and flow of a season?
I think it's more the ebb and flow. I think the one thing, like I said, it was low scoring. They are not a high-octane offensive team. And Kyle McClellan had a better weekend after, go against Michigan. And you go into Yost, they tend to put it on you offensively. So it was a good weekend for him, kind of getting back into, the Mike Richter goalie of the year type of numbers. He looked back in his form. So I think that those are keys for them going forward. It's still February. You want to be peaking in March, but a better weekend for them, playing their style of game.
Notre Dame at home next weekend for Wisconsin. Michigan State has not been great the last couple series. Speaking of Notre Dame, they split in South Bend. Both teams won big.
Yeah.
So what do you read into a weekend like that? Do you feel better about the Spartans maybe than over these last couple of weekends?
I think finally, yes. You didn't like Friday, obviously. And, the last couple weekends, they won a couple. It was a little misleading because they split those weekends, but they only played a couple good periods.
Right.
Which goes to show they can turn it on and go. But they finally played a complete game on Saturday, which I think that's what, Coach Nightingale wants to see day in and day out. But we'll see this weekend when they go to Michigan. But they got better Saturday. They answered on the road after a tough loss Friday, and they needed a complete game to get back on track.
Yeah, and absolutely got it. Irish still trying to make a run. Tough schedule down the stretch for them. They've got some opportunities, though.
Opportunity, yet, it's both flip side, right? Tough, but if you win those games, you're going to elevate, and they need those wins.
Michigan convincing against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Again, this is another team that we know the history here, and it feels like they're coming for you now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the thing, I was on the game Saturday. They won a different way this weekend. They didn't get one power play goal from the top power play in the country. Their top scorers, they've been the first star the last 3 weeks, only had 1 goal completely. So they got scoring depth, and then they got great goaltending from Jake Parchevsky, which if he's not the #1 star of the week this week, I'll give up my lunch today. But he was fantastic. So for them, it's like, okay, we found a different way to win, and that bodes well for them getting into tournament time. Because when you're one-and-done situation and your big guns can't score, you got to find a different way to do it. They did that last weekend, so that bodes well for the future.
And they pull within 2 points of Notre Dame now.
For that home ice.
In those Big Ten standings, right. If you get fourth, you're home ice there. We look ahead to the weekend. Michigan is going to battle Michigan State. One game's in Ann Arbor. The other game is in Detroit at Little Caesars Arena. That one is on the Big Ten Network. Penn State, Minnesota going to battle as well. The Saturday game also on our air. Cappy will be in the studio for those. And then Notre Dame will be in Madison. You got a couple of Big Ten plus games there. But let's get into the Spartans and the Wolverines. What should we expect here?
I mean, that Saturday is going to be bananas, I think, at Little Caesars. I keep want to say Joe Louis, but Little Caesars Arena. I think this is, like we kind of talked before the show, this is what the Big Ten envisioned when you saw these rivalries. You saw it last weekend with Minnesota, Wisconsin. You're going to see it now with Michigan State and Michigan at Little Caesars. A lot on the line in terms of standings, bragging rights. They're both, nearing. Michigan's just outside the top 10, but playing right now, they're playing a lot better than Michigan State, to be honest, the week in, week out. So it's just going to be a really rocking building on Saturday, and I think this is what, like I said, the Big Ten was hoping when they put this together.
And if we could get kind of a repeat of what we had that first series, where between them they scored 20 goals, right?
Yeah. Michigan doesn't want the Saturday where they were up 4-1 and then blew it at home and give up 7-5. But I'm an offensive player.
Yeah, I'm just looking for some exciting
the coaches
action.
and the goalies don't want that.
Right.
But
right.
I'm an offensive guy.
We will look forward to your insights in studio coming up on Saturday. Week ahead in the Big Ten, Michigan State's going to be at Minnesota tomorrow, part of a really interesting week for the Spartans. Wednesday features a big one between Nebraska and Northwestern. Mentioned Michigan State, they will host Illinois, I should say, on Saturday. We got Indiana and Purdue as well. Let's start with Nebraska and Northwestern. The Huskers won when they played in Lincoln. They played without Juwan Gary. They held Boo Buie to 2 of 15 from the field. Now Northwestern, first losing streak of the year. It's the first time they've lost consecutive games. Haven't lost a conference home game. They need this one, and Nebraska feels like they've got to figure out a way to win on the road.
Northwestern needs this one in a big way. They're fighting to have that double bye in the Big Ten, staying in that first 4 race. In this game, Boo Buie has got to be amazing. I expect Boo Buie to be nothing short of it. In that game in Lincoln, at Nebraska, 2 of 15 from the field, like you mentioned, he struggled. They lost that game. But guys with the mentality of Boo Buie, they go out in that next game and they ball out. I think this is a game where Brooks Bernheiser is going to have to move his feet defensively. I think they put him on Keisei Tominaga to try to take him out of the game. But for Nebraska, they've got to find a way to win some road games. They haven't won a road conference game all season long. They've got to win one.
All right, and finally, Illinois going to Michigan State. Spartans have a tough one at Minnesota, as we mentioned first, but what do you make of the matchup at home against the Illini?
Michigan State's got to take care of business. Malik Hall is going now, 19 points in his last game. He's been big time. A.J. Hoggard has got to control the pace of this game. You can't let Illinois turn you over, get out in transition, dominate the glass, and expect to win. A.J. Hoggard's going to be big on both ends. I think it's going to be a wonderful matchup with Tyson Walker and Terrence Shannon Jr. battling for who's the best shooting guard in this league. The glass, turnovers, making free throws, I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, Illinois won, remember, when they played in Champaign, was a close game, and you mentioned the free throws. That was a huge difference. It's something Illinois does so well, is getting themselves to the free throw line. We saw it last night against Nebraska as well.
And in that first game, you see Illinois making Coach Izzo do things that he didn't want to do defensively. They were doubling Marcus Domask in the post, creating offense for Illinois. I think in this game, you're going to see Coach Izzo do something different. I think they're going to stay one-on-one with Marcus Domask, maybe put a bigger body on him to keep him out of the lane, maybe put Magic Sissoko or one of those guys on Ty Rodgers, let him float around, be a second defender. But that matchup is going to be key. But Michigan State, you're playing tough basketball. Steven Izzo saved the season. They got to keep it going.
It's interesting to me. I mean, that is a huge game. Michigan State going to Minnesota is a
big one.
Big and challenging game. It's a big game for both of those teams. I still think Minnesota can get this done, right? But you got to win games like that, like the one they won against Northwestern. Should be a great week. Look forward to sharing it with you here on the Big Ten.